Hjertelig velkommen til dagens siste sesjon. Dette er en sesjon vi har fått i stand i samarbeid med LearnLab. Jeg skal si litt mer om det. Først vil jeg bare si at hvis dere nå hører meg og ikke ser meg, så er det antagelig fordi dere ikke har maksimert videovinduet deres. Hvis dere ønsker å se den som snakker, så trykk på de 2 diagonale pilene oppe til høyre, så får dere stort videovindu, og da kan dere se både den skjermen som deles og den som snakker. Ja, som jeg sa, dette plenumet med Michael Fullan har vi fått i stand i samarbeid med LearnLab. Jeg skal introdusere Yngve Lindvik, som igjen skal introdusere Michael. Dette foredraget kommer til å vare frem til ca. 5:45. Så etter det så blir det premietrekning for de av dere som har vært flinke å samle poeng i portalen i dag. Så følg med oss helt til slutt, fine premier. Men nå skal jeg gi ordet til Yngve Lindvik fra LearnLab. Han har jobbet med EdTech i 20 år. Han har grunnlagt og er leder i LearnLab, et sømløst økosystem for dybdelæring. Han har vært med å grunnlegge ARC, Atlantic Rim Collaboratory, sammen med Andy Hargreaves, og han brenner for å bidra til et utdanningssystem med aktive og kreative elever. Han har også jobbet sammen med noen av verdens fremste forskere innen utdanning, deriblant ettermiddagens hovedperson, Michael Fullan. Så Yngve, jeg gir ordet videre til deg.
Takk. Veldig hyggelig å få lov til å være med på NKUL, og har også vært på NKUL i mange år. I'll shift to English now because I want to introduce Michael in English. And I don't think you need much of an introduction, Michael, because most educators have heard your name already. I've been so lucky that I've been working with you for about 10 years now. We went to Denmark together and have done some work in Norway over the years. And what I find especially motivating with your work is your ability to be crisp and clear. you call it sticky notes. It's basically the ability to say something so specifically and clear that it's easy to understand what it means. And one of my favorite quotes of yours is use the group to change the group. And I think that quote really captured the essence of progressive education, where you have to collaborate, you have to be together, you have to enable the group if you are going to be changing the system. You have also been writing a lot of books. One that's been translated into Norwegian by one of the employees in LearnLab. Deep learning, dybdelæring, is one of the reasons one. And I've been very, very motivated by reading a lot of what you have been written over the years. And today you are going to introduce this paper, The Right Drivers for Whole System Success. And I really think you are taking away the most important messages about how we are going to evolve over the years if we are going to be a better system for all students. So welcome to this keynote. I'm looking forward to hear you again. And I hope everybody will enjoy this session. I'll leave the floor to Alan that's going to start using LearnLab for the beginning of this session.
Thank you, Yngve. And just to be clear, we are going to give the scene to Michael very, very shortly for all of you waiting for him and his keynote. We have some questions initially that we would like to get your help with responding to, you viewers, you beautiful participants in this webinar meeting, whatever you want to call it. And we've prepared these questions inside a LearnLab. So on your screen now is a short guide and help to get you into the session with me and Michael and Yngve and all the others. And we can see that some people have already started filling up the room, Michael, but we will give them a couple of seconds without me nagging them to follow the instructions on screen. And you can do this on a browser, on your phone, on a tablet, or another device. It's up to you which device you would like to use. A small tip from me is to actually use your phone, because then you won't be having to change between browser windows or browser tabs in the middle of the presentation. So I think that's it for me introducing the platform. And in a couple of seconds, when people are done joining and found their way into the platform, we will ask them a few questions before you get your start, Michael.
Okay.
So the code to join is 289441. Hvis du ønsker å bli med i denne økta og svare på spørsmål som Michael gjerne vil ha svar på i starten av økta, så går du inn på learnlab.net på telefonen eller på nettleseren og skriver inn koden 289441. Der vil det også være mulig å stille spørsmål direkte til Michael på slutten av denne presentasjonen. Du kan skrive de spørsmålene underveis i presentasjonen, og dere har mulighet til å skrive et spørsmål, stille et spørsmål hver. Da tror jeg vi skal lukke ned vinduet her. Det vil ikke si at det ikke går an å være med. Koden står fortsatt øverst i vinduet på skjermen her. But we will give the word to you, Michael, and we will see the first question. Would you like to iterate on the question? To what extent is the system holding back students as deep learners?
Yes, it's a good question, and we will get into it in the presentation some more. But I would say the direct answer is the system must be holding back students because the majority of students and the majority of countries tell us that the current system is not fit for the learning that they need. So that's what they say all the time. So there's something going on in that. And then I would say some students who, if they haven't experienced deep learning, may not know what it is, but others are way ahead of it. So I'd be interested in what the audience thinks about this question. Like we see the numbers coming up now.
So it seems like to some extent is the absolute largest answer. About 66% of the participants chose to some extent as their option.
Yeah, and my main message in a sense is let's get the students involved on that question.
Okay, so the next question we wanted to ask is, based on the first question, which of the following do you think is the major factor holding back students as deep learners? And on this question, you may choose more than one alternative. And we will see the results coming in here, Michael.
Yep.
Testing and exams, sailing up as the leader very early on, top-down leadership, not the right pedagogy, lack of collaboration. Yeah, you can see the alternatives quite spread out so far.
Yeah, amazingly so. I was just watching the Kentucky Derby, the horse race on Saturday. So these graphs going. Yeah, the testing still wins out. Not the right pedagogy is up there too, which is really salient. Yeah, it's interesting. That's quite spread out. A lot of reasons. So we should be able to do something about those reasons. Turn them into missing graphs after a while when we get the system working.
We will leave the floor to you now, Michael. I will still have this presentation open in the background, and we will get back to it in the end of the session, which means I will now go to this screen. Do you have any questions for Michael Fullan? I will have this open during the presentation. You all have one question you might ask. And if you don't have a question, please press the show results, vis resultater, and then put a thumbs up on the question you want answered. So you can either participate with a question or you can like someone else's question to have it prioritized. I think that's it for me, Michael. I'm looking forward to your session and your keynote. The floor is yours.
Okay, so I'm going to share screen now, and the questions, we'll keep running tabs of those, and then we'll visit them at the end of the presentation, about a half an hour from now. And so I want to say a couple of words in advance. We have a team of about 10 people. We're mainly based in Ontario, but we work in, you'll see later, in at least 12 countries. And we tend to work on two things. They overlap a bit. One is system change. How do you get the whole system, which is a state or a country, or a district, sometimes a municipality, to change. And then the other one is deep learning, a particular solution, if you like, very close to what LearnLab is doing. So that's why we have such strong mutual interest. And I'm glad, as Yngve said, that we've had at least 10 years working together, and it gets better and better all the time. I think the need for it gets more evident, especially with the pandemic, as you'll see. So this is a dynamic combination of things. And one other thing I want to say is that I say accurately that 80% of our best ideas come from leading practitioners. By that, I mean, we team up as our modus operandi always, do things together with large chunks of the system, and we pull out the lessons, usually write a book or a report about it at that, but it's practice chasing theory. This is not theory, and then how do you use it? It's creating new ideas as we go. So that's what I want to do. I will surround the right drivers with other factors, but I'll zero in on the right drivers, as you'll see. This is one of the surrounds. That there's no question the pandemic has, the word I use in English, discombobulate the system in fundamental ways. It's like pulling the rug out from under, turning it upside down, whatever image you want. But at the same time, the positive news is it creates openings for transforming what we have. And what we have wasn't very good, actually. If we go to December 2019, it wasn't good enough. So we see this then as the opportunity of a generation. You'll hear me talk later about the moonshot, because that's the analogy we want to use right now, is that what the transformation opportunity is on that slide. But the moonshot is to think of this decade, the 2020s, as the ones that we can start to make a difference very quickly, actually. Go fast to go slow is another sticky phrase we have. Quickly in the sense that we already knew that we were already working on solutions, as you were. And secondly, the need for rapid action now is very evident, and people are calling for more urgency. They're calling for innovation even. So that's the good news. Sticking with the problem for a few moments, there's two big reasons. I've written about these. They're in the report. One reason is physical, let's say, and the other is social. The physical reason is the climate collapse. We all know about that. We know that that it's really imminent, that it could lead to disaster, increasingly so. And so that's a big dimension. And then the other dimension is social, I want to call it, which one part is, I call it galloping inequality. You'll see that evidence in the report, the right drivers. For the last 40 years at least, there's been a growing gap between those that are getting money and those that aren't getting it. That gap is inequity. It's prominent, it's relentless, it's deep, and we've got to change that. And the other way of thinking about the social is relationships. And one of the books that I like a lot, the recent book, is called Upswing, written by Robert Putnam from Harvard. And in Upswing, he shows evidence, for the last 150 years, actually, trends of themes that he calls I-ness and we-ness. So I-ness is a period where people are turned into themselves, and we-ness is when you want to work with others. And so you can imagine some of that. There's actually, after the Second World War in the US, the data show a strong degree of we-ness, for example, from 1945 to 1970. And then you get in the more recent period during the Trump era, but actually before that, into I-ness. And now the question is, how do we go beyond that? You see the data on social trust that Putnam provided, that literally the perceptions that people have in the US in this case of society, to what extent do you trust other people in society? That's cut in half, really dramatically down, and still going down. So that's part of the context. If we go into the main reasons why progress hasn't been made, this is from ours and other data. There's the failure, a big one. I won't read all of these on the screen. You have the deck right now, and you can share it widely. But the main reasons, a couple of big ones for us: the failure to connect students with purpose, absolutely big. The continued use of ineffective pedagogy, which is not really getting in that. So there's a number of reasons that we know and that caused us to team up with schools starting in about 2015 to do something about this. One other piece of this, Jal Mehta, who's a professor at Harvard, he's done a lot of work on deep learning. He wrote a book called In Search of Deep Learning, because he said, when I search it, I don't find it as much. This was in the US. And he said, the reason we don't find it is that, I love his phrase, there's a yawning gap between how schools are organized and how youth will learn best. And you can see his 5 reasons for that yawning gap. And then the context, here's another piece of data. There's a Center for Adolescence in Stanford, and the head of the center is a woman named Heather Mellon, and she does all kinds of group consultancies with students at senior high school, for example, years 11 and 12. And she has found consistently that only about 24% of students really can articulate a connection between what they're doing in those grades and they're heading for graduation and what their purpose in life or what is preparing them to do in life. So this is serious. It basically says the vast majority of students are not connecting to the kind of present we need to cope with the present and the immediate future. And that's no longer even a criticism. It says the regular pedagogy, the regular school that we've had for 150 years or 200 years is no longer the right one. So that's why we turned to this new purpose, and I want to call it new, to develop learners who can engage and thrive in the complex system immediately, not for the future, but right away while they're in school. Deep learning does that immediately as part of the pedagogy and the work that they do. And so this is a big immediate purpose that has to be pursued every day, and it goes. And here, this next slide, I just created it actually. I'll put it in a moment for you. I was thinking of Norway. In Norway, I only lived there for a year, a long time ago, but I've had many visits back and forth. And it's got great education system. It's got a good society. It's fantastic in many ways. But the question is there enough press for the kind of changes that should be made? And here I want to tease you, I think is the phrase I would use. Lenin had a phrase, an observation about system change. He said, there are decades when nothing happens, and there are then weeks when decades happen. So the speed of change, and our hypothesis is that we've had the decades of nothing much happening in the schooling. And we're now at the cusp heading into this decade, the moonshot decade, where decades will happen. That is, there'll be a lot of changes. And so I've used the phrase go slow to go fast, one of the original sticky phrases. But I think the worry is, does go slow means you don't go anywhere? Are you going too slow? So I think the risk taking, the push, the moonshot was a risk. It was a calculated risk, but there was no reason to believe it would work. But there was a goal of doing it and a pathway. That's how I feel about system change. And that's how I feel about Norway, that it's time to go fast in the sense that Lenin was using it to really take advantage of the qualities and to add new focus. That new focus, and I'll zero in on the human paradigm that is part of the right drivers, but just to surround it with some important facts of our strategy. Forging unity of purpose, a big one. That unity of purpose is when people, really all the players, the policy level, the municipalities, the schools, the communities, have an increasing sense of clarity about the purpose of learning. And that forging must come through interaction local, interaction across the levels. And forging is the right word. And the unity of purpose, in other words, unity of purpose is not something you decide in advance and then you implement it. Unity of purpose is when you have a direction and then you flesh it out by doing it. And so you forge it during implementation. Very important concept. Another important, obviously, is collaboration, but it's collaboration, yes, to develop unity of purpose, but also it's accompanied by specific actions. We want actual movement, not just people meeting. Collaboration, you can collaborate to do nothing or do the wrong thing. So it's movement. Part of this, and I'm just going to give you 3 or 4 slides on the evidence about collaboration, good collaboration. First, I would say that collaboration doesn't automatically mean it's good. You can collaborate to do nothing. You can collaborate to do the wrong thing. That collaboration has been around in schools for 50 years, and it's got a different track record. But in the last 5 years, because I know the research, some of our own, but also Andy Hargraves and John Hattie and others, we have zeroed in on the specific aspects of collaboration that make for impact. And one of these is, there's 3 phrases I'm going to use. Terms, they all the same concept, overlapping concept. Those phrases are collective efficacy, collaborative professionalism, and connected autonomy. So let me take each of those. Collective efficacy was when we asked John Hattie 10 years ago to start looking at the group effects, not just the individual teachers. He said he would, he did. And he came up with this finding. I'll give you, first of all, the quantitative finding, the effect size. If you know his work, which is ranging effect sizes of pedagogical practices, you can go on his website and you'll find, I would say, 350 effect sizes ranging from above 1.0 to minus something. And in it, he recently, when he did the collective efficacy, which I'll define in 4 elements in the next slide, he found, I'm going to just say it, a whopping 1.57 impact. Nearly all of his 350 impacts are below 1. So here's 1.57. And the group should be more powerful than the individual. And that's what he found. But you have to know what is meant by collective efficacy. And collective efficacy, these 4 elements, these are his findings. They said when the group, he was talking about schools, or sometimes a combination of schools, when there's a shared belief that they will have success with the very students they're serving, when the primary input for there is evidence of impact, which is not as easy to find as sounds, evidence of impact, so they want to know what works. Third, they collaborate to implement pedagogical strategies that have the better yield, the better learning. So they have to collaborate because the fastest way to learn in innovation is to learn from peers well led. And then the fourth one, I should say, element, write up. We could have written this. We did write it, I think, in some ways, that the leader who participates as a learner, any leader, but let's say school leader, a leader who participates as a learner, that very phrase is around specific things that work, the one that gets the greatest results. So one other, I mentioned collaborative professionalism. This is Andy and Michael O'Connor in their book. They 3 big themes. They studied collaboration of professional learning networks around the world, 7 countries. And the first one really tells it all for us. The joint work of collaborative professionalism is embedded in the culture and life of the school. Collaborative professionalism is not when you meet for a professional learning community every Friday or twice a month or whatever. It's not just the meeting. What happens in between meetings is what it is. And it is collaborative. It is the built into the culture of the school. However, we have added a new concept. It's a new term. It's really, we think, a very powerful one and more accurate and more inspirational than either collective efficacy or collaborative professionalism, even though it's the same territory. I called it connected autonomy, which it means that being autonomous is a good thing to a certain degree, as long as you're connected with others as well in a 2-way street. Be your own person, contribute to the learning of others, learn from others. A similar expansion here, a single concept that encompasses the state of being autonomous and of being in the group. So autonomy is good. Isolation is bad. Isolation, you get sick or you wither. Autonomy, you're your own person and you have ideas. And therefore, when you come to the group, you have something you contribute. When Yngve said, use the group to change the group, he was talking about the interaction between the group and the individual that has elements of autonomy and working together. To reinforce the leadership question again, this is success occurs, participates as learners, changing the culture the way that I mentioned. And when I show you deep learning, a specific way around that very much model. So clarity of strategy, which are always, when you're doing a good strategy, you're building commitment, you're building capacity, you're building clarity all the way through. And then one final warning on the collective part is the importance of learning outside your individual school. I work with one of the management leaders in the US, a guy named Lyle Kurtman, and he's identified 7 competencies that leaders have that are very effective. And his 7th one is builds external networks. And I want to underscore this because a lot of collaboration doesn't make it clear that, yes, the collaboration is inside the school or inside the group that's working, but what about its connection outside? And he found literally the following, that when leaders paid attention to learning or to pedagogy, but they stayed inside the walls of their school or their entity, they didn't get as good results as leaders who paid attention to learning, but also linked outside to contribute and to learn from others. This is a connected autonomy outside. So you see his 4 reasons for that conclusion, 4 elements of it. So that's by way of just reinforcing the direction we want to go eventually in the right drivers section of the paper that I'm going to highlight. But related to that, though, is our work on deep learning. And we're going right now, if you think about it this way, the deep learning is our intensive work on the right drivers. The right drivers is when I stood back and said, what does this mean for the world of education? And so our deep learning is this increasingly clear in our work as we work. Remember, we learn from practitioners. That means we learn from students as well as teachers. And we increasingly, especially during and since the pandemic, is that the young want to be and are a source of innovation about their own learning, but also about the world. And so I've got a few bullet points here, 4 of them on that these are things that we have documented in the last 14 months. We knew some of them before, but now we have lots of evidence. And if you go on our website, it's got deep/learning.global. You can see a whole bunch of video clips, 3-4 minutes. I'm going to show one later that describe this. So think of now the new strategy of learning is not only to have students active learners, but to use them as a source of innovation for where we go. Taglines, we have these 2. These came strictly, almost I could say, from the students' mouths, that engage the world, change the world, engage the world to learn about it, and then wanting to change it as part of that. Good at learning, good at life. Can you go through the existing school system and be successful, get good grades and graduate and still not be good at life? The answer is yes. You have to widen the definition of what learning is. So this brings it a lot alive, and I'll show you then how we got to it. We started in 2015, I mentioned. We knew there was something wrong with the existing system. We knew there were pockets of schools around the world because we were interacting with them that wanted to do something about this. So they were inclined the way we were. So we said, why not combine the researchers like us and the practitioners like you and figure it out together? And that deep learning should be their fundamental point of departure. This has now evolved. It started with about 7 countries. It is now, as you can see, I think it's 12. This doesn't mean that the government in each case is deciding to do it. It's quite often a district or a chunk of it. In the case of Uruguay, it is the government. In the case of the United States, it's districts in several states. Canada, the same, districts. In one province, Newfoundland, Labrador, the whole province with its 215 schools came in. But they're clusters of school. The minimal is you can't come in as an individual school. It has to be a combination. That combination might be 5 schools, or it might be, in the case of a district, 83 schools, whatever. They're learning from each other. We're using this group internal to any given cohort, but also across it, because we have monthly Learn Labs. We have day-long sessions now, especially enabled by remote learning. We have live labs, deep learning labs, regionally and once a year globally. So there's a lot of learning coming into that. But what is that? What is deep learning? We can start with the focus on global competencies, the 6 C's we call them. 2 of those C's were not so prominent for a while, character and citizenship. The first 4 were kicking around, I'm going to say, since 1990, probably. Let's get ready for the 21st century. And they were called the 21st century competencies: communication, critical thinking, global collaboration, and creativity. And then when we added character and citizenship, it zeroes in on the responsibility of the learner and the development of in relation to the group. So the 6 C's in combination. And we've defined them very carefully with the groups, are the very focus of the global competencies, deep learning that students need to cope and change for the better the global society that we're now living in. And we're finding, just to give you a differentiation here, that creativity, character, and citizenship, excuse me, are the most catalytic, is the word I want to use. That they do cause other things to ramify. So we have put these into, these are the 6. You'll notice that each one has 3 or 4 subdimensions. So we define them, highly specific. Another sticky phrase: strive for precision, but avoid prescription. That's a change rule. Get specific, get precise, but don't impose it on others, because change goes wrong when you impose it. And besides, if you're specific about a good idea and it's specific, people can see it, then they'll be attracted to it. You don't have to force them. They'll want to do it. If the group is doing, there'll be good peer pressure. So this is, these are the 6 C's. You can see we've, the book, as Yngve said, our first book on Engage the World, Change the World, Deep Learning, is translated into Norwegian. So you can see some of these elements here. But I want to show you just a 4-minute clip here of one of, I could show you 500 of these now, 4 minutes each or so. And these are, and you'll see in this clip, as you will see in every one, that students are in many ways the leaders, the center of action. And in this, we see a video, and I'll give you a kind of a broad instruction here. Just think, when you see this 4-minute video, write a note to yourself when you see any of the 6 C's, just a running tab. But just the setup, you'll need to know, there's 3 schools, happens to be in Victoria State in Australia. These 3 schools got together as part of our deep learning network. We have 80 schools in Victoria doing this. And they said, we want to work together on some teamwork internal to the schools, but across the 3 schools. And the task we set for ourselves, the student-led but teacher-enabled, is to develop some ideas that will improve the world, whatever they are, small or big, develop ideas. So what you're going to see now is 4 minutes where the students are telling us in the sharing at the end of the first 3 years of the project, across the 3 schools, they're sharing what they found. So I'm just going to show it to you, ask you to keep a note to yourself. I'll do some, then delve into the right drivers very soon, and then we'll have a good discussion for the rest of the time.
At Canterbury Primary School today, we're hosting Young Minds of the Future Expo, where 3 schools have come together, Chatham Primary, Ringwood North Primary and Canterbury, to do a project all about the future.
We each have to research a problem and then create something to solve it.
Seeing all these amazing inventions everywhere is awesome. The community's really been great. We've had over 50 people come to our store so far. I've seen so many cool things, from little juice cups to feeding the homeless to transportation, things like our idea.
We've even seen around the world subways.
So this is the automatic dog feeder. You'd set the timer as for 3 o'clock, as you can see with the wires in there. And then as the day would go past, it'd hit that, which is send the current through, and then the dog food would fall down. I thought of it because both my parents go to work and we go to school, and my dog's always left outside at home and she usually just sleeps, so at night she's up. I think it would be really great for the owners and also their pets' lives and their relationships between each other. Our idea is a sober sensor, which basically is a steering wheel that will scan for drugs and alcohol through the sweat. As to why we want this is to contribute to the Towards Zero Fund, which is an initiative that will hopefully stop drink driving on the roads and make sure that less people die on our roads. I decided to make the light pots because I love plants and water and all the beautiful things in nature, and I don't want it to disappear. This will help people look after their plants better and also save water. It shows when your plant is not watered because there's no energy in the dirt, so the light won't go on. But when it's wet, the light will go on to show this plant is watered, you don't need to water it anymore.
We decided to make cricket flour cookies because the population growth on Earth is really fast. Livestock's just not that sustainable. Cows are one of the largest producers of methane on Earth, and methane can contribute to greenhouse gases. However, insects don't let out any methane, so they can reduce greenhouse gases.
So when we found out that in the United States alone, there were 4,000 drownings between 2005 and 2014, we thought we had to do something. So we invented a drone that flies over your head and drops a life buoy to save you. So while the lifeguards come and swim out to you, you're floating there ready for them.
Just walking through this small exhibition, looking at all the new inventions, it really just makes you think, oh, that's a good idea and that could help me every day. And like some of them are really cool and I could get and find them really helpful.
Events like Young Minds of the Future is important because it's a chance to work with other people from other schools and hear other people's ideas.
We believe that most of these ideas will make it into the real world. If not, they will be considered and people will know about them.
It shows kids creativity and it lets people have their own point of view. In Young Minds of the Future, we didn't really have a standard. We didn't have to make a certain thing. We got to do basically anything that we thought would change the world, and I find that really interesting.
Okay, so you can see all kinds of learning there. Another sticky phrase, talk the walk. The way those students, they didn't have to prepare for the video, that clarity came tripping off their tongues so that they were highly specific because they were doing it. They didn't have to prepare for the camera. And that they learned math, they learned science, they learned group work and empathy, all those things. And so we have been measuring this, measuring it in order to be able to keep track of it and increase students' abilities on each of the 6 C's, but also to wherever the outcome leaves. And I'll leave that because I know it'll come up in the discussion. We are now grappling with the outcome of, let's say, secondary school learning and the way in which standardized test or testing is interfering with learning. But then the question mark of how do you know there's good learning by the time you get to year 12? So that will come up later. We're working on it actively these days, as you are. And so our model is simple in one way. It's got only, I guess, 3 layers. One layer is the 6 C's. That's what you see on this diagram. Deep learning are the 6 C's. The second layer is the learning design. And we have, you see the 4 pedagogical practices, learning partnerships between and among students and teachers and groups. The learning environments, really thinking about how the learning environment, outdoor education is a big part of this. And leveraging digital, which is the role of technology, that now we are really using technology in a very integrated way with pedagogy. So these, that's 2 layers. There's a third layer, which has to do with the infrastructure that I'll show you in the big model, but there's only 3. So it's very concentrated, comprehensive, I think. It doesn't leave out anything. And one of the themes, and you have in some ways, at least LearnLab has been ahead of the game because they've been integrating and leveraging technology. These are some of the principles, but the particulars you have to see in the LearnLab. And we are learning from the LearnLab as we are developing our own abilities back and forth of how do you capture the best role of technology and the ideas that come from it. I mentioned also about the full model. You see now we've added the third layer, which are the conditions. This is the culture of the school conditions. It's the culture of the municipality, district or regional, and system conditions or policy. And then there's the wraparound collaborative inquiry, which is the way we try to keep track of what we're learning. So why deep learning is transforming practice? Here are 6 ways. You can look at them more carefully when you see that, but they're pretty convincing and they're heading us in a very strong and a good direction. As part of this, and one of our key team members of the 10 is Dr. Jean Clinton, who's a neuroscientist and a child psychiatrist. And she was attracted to the 6 C's because in her work, first of all, neuroscience is developing into new domains, where showing, for example, that the adolescent brain is fertile for learning. We used to think was only the early years, and how the brain can adapt all the way through life. And then the other content part that Jean Clinton said, and she put it this way after she worked with us for a few months, she said the 6 C's, and this is exactly how she phrased it, is immunizing students from further deterioration. In other words, students that were declining because they weren't good learners, let's say, they have a new spark of learning in life because of the relationship. And so she used the DNA metaphor that said deep learning and well-being are together. So let me zero in on the setup for our discussion. It is about the right drivers for whole system success. I wrote this and we released it February 12th, just 2 months ago, I guess. And it's not a blueprint, but it's a framework for implementation. It really does capture 4 big chunks that are comprehensive, that are powerful, that represent the new world of learning. And I would say that the major way of thinking about the new world of learning is it shifts learning and education and schooling from being a passive recipient of societal policies or developments to being a proactive creator of the future. Education as an agent of change, where it hasn't been for the last, it's been more a transmission of what we know rather than a creation of the new era. So that's how I'd like it to be seen. We know that this is really happening. I've showed you these, that the model itself, and I tried to make it comprehensive and make it cover everything. This is when you get big, you don't want to have a model that only can be explained with 30 different elements that nobody can remember. It gets too complicated. But if you can capture it in a small number, I've done it in 4 pairs, as you see, and it has some evidence and that people can see where they are in that framework. And so I'd like you to think about where you might be in this framework. I'm going to show you 3 or so items for each of the pairs. And we'll start with the wrong side of the pair first, the one on the right side, which I call the bloodless paradigm. And then we'll compare it to the best side, the effective side, the left side. And this is what's attracted LearnLab. They love the human paradigm because that's what they're doing. That's the way they want to capture it. And this enables them to think about that capture. So this is the relationship. In terms of where we should go with these, the best way of saying it is that what we want to do is dampen the presence of the factors on the right, not eliminate them, but dampen their negative effects. And then on the left, we want to highlight and make them more prominent when the driver's seat, if I use that analogy some more. So let me stay with me while I can give you 3 or so elements from each pair, and starting with the wrong driver, so-called narrow academic focus. I'm not going to read these. I'm just going to leave them on the screen while I talk to them. But I've marshaled a lot of evidence, and this report has the research evidence, the documented authors, the documented books. One of the books, when they even looked at the successful students, that is, they went through school, that kind of struggled, an exam they passed, they went to university, whatever. He called them the wounded warrior winners. The wounded winners were students who did become successful, in a literal sense, but they actually weren't fit for life. They didn't feel good at the end of it. They had as much stress in the Asian countries, whether you take Singapore or South Korea or Shanghai or combinations of those. There's a lot of stress in those. Even though they do well on PISA, they don't do well in life. And I know Norway and Canada have avoided being too influenced by PISA. We've avoided that because we wanted our own basis. Our own basis then for us is this right driver. It's well-being. What it does is and you saw in the Young Minds of the Future a good evidence of this. It integrates well-being and learning in the same phenomenon. It doesn't mean that emotional learning is over here, or SEL, as it's called, is over there. It doesn't mean that at all. It's integrated into our measures, into our 6 C's. it really builds up those 5 elements. And this is the driving force, the new purpose of education, I want to call it, the driving force. And this is what we can debate later. It does encompass the academic part, and it takes us away from the obsession with the academic part that does more harm than good. So think of this as the primary driver. That's one of 4. The second driver, and this is, I put it in a playful way. Now think about technology and think about it in terms of machine intelligence and social intelligence, the group. And there's a quite an interesting book that traced, and actually the book was called The Race Between Education and Technology. And it came out in, I think, around 2010. And that book traced the last 80 years in the US. And they had evidence that said in those first 60 years, 1900 to 1960, education raced ahead, this is their language, ahead of technology. It was getting stronger, mobility was getting better, the gaps were closing, all of them was good news until about 1978, 79. And then almost overnight, it seemed to change. And machines started to have the upper hand, partly because we underinvested in education. We underinvested in early learning and a number of other things. We went into what we'll see in a moment in the austerity phase of being careful with the money and failing to promote educational development. And we paid the price. And the price is technology that is stronger and education that is weaker. So we have in our model changed that. We changed it with driver number 1 by coming into well-being. We changed it even more by driver 2. I use the general term social intelligence. It's collaboration writ large, and it's about people. It's always relational. Most of those things I showed you about collective efficacy, collaborative cultures, the kind of leaders learning, participate as a learner. They are all part of this social intelligence, which we think has been underestimated. And an interesting way of putting it is that we have allowed technology to be prominent, and we have underdeveloped or underestimated the capacity of individuals to be a stronger force. So our educational model makes individuals and individuals working together a stronger force in relation to, for example, technology. The third one of 4 is this very interesting one, a complete new base of knowledge for me. And that is almost out of the blue, about a year and a half ago, I think, even very recent, there was all of a sudden, out of the blue, about 5 or 6 books written by economists, all of them women economists, that took a different analysis, especially around the conclusion, where they started to trace around the world, but they often use the US because it's an example of going off the track. The US was very successful up until 1975 and has declined since then. So they like to use that, and the data are available. And what they did in these books, and books are all quoted and named, so I invite you to read them. Fantastic reading for, I'll say, a non-economist, because now they're thinking socially as economists and doing it. And so they did show that between 1980 and 2020, those 40 years, that there was this fairly steady increase in wealth of GDP, 2.5%, 3% or whatever. But the distribution of wealth went overwhelmingly to those that already had money, the owners and the heads of the company, and underwhelmingly to people and workers. And Scandinavia has a different tax structure, so they've been a little more sensitive to that. But overall, there has been not enough attention paid to the investment side. And the evidence is absolutely on the negative side. What I call distorted austerity is overwhelmingly negative. Now, the big difference in these books is that all of these economists said, that's true, but the wrong way of thinking about it is to save money. The better way is to think of investing to build capacity building, increased focused investment, not just a bunch of money, no strings attached, but early learning, figuring out how to get jobs, helping people under crisis. And the best example of this in practice right now, recent, is Joe Biden's presidency. One of those actually authors is one of his advisors. So he's gone to driver 3. This is what he's doing. And you have to be careful that you don't waste money. You have to be careful that it helps crisis, and B, especially it helps development. And I guess the question for Norway, who's had good money, so to speak, is whether there are targeted investments that are aligned with the 4 right drivers that would have a high yield, which these economists claim will happen. And then finally, on the drivers, there's the driver 4. Fragmentation has always been with us. Ad hoc policies, not enough coherence. We've written about that. But what to do about it? I call it systemness. And systemness is a bit of an odd word, but it's a real word. It's the degree to which the levels, let's take the school and community level, the municipality level, and the government level, the national level, and degree to which people within those levels have a degree of consistency about what should happen, and across the levels have a degree of consistency, and that those, to use an analogy to our coherence concept, we said we want coherence to mean what's in your mind. That is, I have a sense of coherence, not alignment where you can describe the pieces, but they're not connected, but actually connected in a way you experience them emotionally and rationally. We want the same thing for systemness. We want the notion that the moonshot commitment is to improve the country by improving each of those levels in their own right and across levels, and using the 4 right drivers. That's the message, especially driver 1, the big shift into well-being and learning as a more powerful set of competencies, specific enough to actually put into place, and also to be appreciated, because here's one of the findings, that deep learning is good for all students, but it's especially good for students who have been disconnected. In other words, it helps inequity disproportionately towards greater equity. Fantastic finding. And then just to round off with these 2 more slides, then we'll have good time, I think, to open up and discuss about this. Marianne Mazzucato is one of those 5 women economists that I drew upon. She wrote an excellent book on the analysis. And then just as I was releasing the book, she came out with a second book called Mission Economy, where she basically said the mission economy is to change the trends of austerity that we've looked like, so that 10 years later, capital will have a very different, more equal distribution. There'll still be good creation of wealth, except to be better distributed, and poverty will be addressed better, more effectively. Living in the global competencies will be better. And then she called that the analogy to the moonshot capabilities. And when she analyzed the moonshot, and a quick way of looking at this, if you just look on Google and go to the 1961 speech by President John F. Kennedy, it's called the Rice University speech, because he made it at the university called Rice, R-I-C-E. And it's a great 20-minute speech, very, very interesting. But when she sort of took it apart, she said, the moonshot capabilities we need are leadership, coordination, administration, risk-taking, learning from it. They're all actually part of the 4 drivers as far as I'm concerned. And so the challenge to you as a country is to create your own moonshot, whatever you want to call it, that accelerates. You've made investments in the last 10 years. Norway has done fine, but not fine enough, I guess, on your own views as well. And that this next decade is the time to really move ahead. And it will accelerate, I think. It'll start slow and then build fast. And so the next 24 months is crucial. This is a timely point of view. And this last slide, I've taken the word concept hopefulness, where a lot of people have lost hope. And I've said they've experienced hopelessness. That's what they've experienced. What we have to do now to turn it around is have people, students especially, experience the success, what we call learned hopefulness, because with that pockets of success, they will be leverage change agents for society. in these years we're talking about. So that's really where I want to stop. And I know we're going to have some good conversation for the next 25 minutes around these issues. So thank you very much. We'll just take my slides off the screen and go into this interchange mode.
Thank you very, very much, Michael. I'm all blurry because of the quality of your talk here. And I think it's not just my camera, it's also a little bit of a blurriness in my eyes, because this really speaks to me as both a teacher and an educator. Very, very insightful. Thank you. Thank you so much. We are now moving into the part of the presentation where you guys at home or wherever you are will be able to ask Michael questions and be part of the discussion. So we have enabled one question and one like for each participant inside the LearnLab platform. I would like you to go in there and ask a question if you don't have already. We have some great questions there, so we can start the discussion already. Michael, if you're ready, just have a sip of your water or your coffee, and I will bring the questions up on the screen that we've gotten so far. And if anyone is uncomfortable with writing their question in English, it's fine to write it in Norwegian. Just be aware that I will translate it as best as I can, but I'm not sure that I will get all of the depth and the insight of the question to Michael. So that's a risk you will be willing to take if you write in Norwegian. I've tried to categorize the questions a little bit here, Michael. And as you can see, on the topic of deep learning, we have thrown on top of the list with the most likes. We have the question, what is step one if you want your students to learn deeper? So that's the first question.
Okay, well, step one is we have this phrase, go slow to go fast. And so in each case, because we've had now a lot of experience, we have had 2,000 sets of schools join. And you have to, I think about predictably, there's already interest in the schools. Everyone we've ended up with, there is some degree of interest. So the tricky change part is don't impose it on other people who aren't used to it yet. You have to go with some that are they're interested. And the two most important first steps, one, ask students. You know, we're talking about learning. What kind of learning? What did you learn from the pandemic about about the best and worst ways of learning? What did you learn? So you get that discussion. But the most powerful way is for cross visits. We have almost, well, I would say all of the people that are participating, they are inviting. We enable it. They said we want visitors to come virtually these days, of course, but we're happy to share what we're learning, partly because we want to contribute, but also when we share, we get such good questions that sharpens our thinking. So you gently make it easy for people to find out the direction without imposing on them. And then when there's take up, you can use the group to change the group because the take up leads you to action.
Thank you. That's a good answer. On the topic of teacher networks and professional development, we have a question here with the most amount of likes so far, and that is, what are the best ideas for empowering teachers to take part in and lead collective development that makes real improvements for learners?
In our resources, the books, we have not only the first one, but we now have the recent one, Dive into Deep Learning. It's full of protocols and instruments and video references about examples of what this looks like in practice. So what we recommend is if a group is interested in teachers forming a network inside the school or across the school, you need to show them some examples of what it looks like to stimulate their thinking about what fits best. So we want to have a degree of choice, but also a degree of knowledge about what's out there, what's working, and so forth. That's one thing. And then the second, I think, is to be careful with the group. Where's the center of gravity of where this is going? So if it's just teachers, we think that's too limited. If it's run by school principals as professional learning communities where too limited. So the best ones, essentially for us, have to then use students as partners with teachers as part of that network to define and elaborate on it. And in our book, you'll see charts like the old way where the teacher's role was the following 8 things, and the new way the teacher's student role is the following 8 by comparison. So what used to be, what should be. So teacher as initiator versus teacher as enabler. It has that kind of a parallel. So I think it's really important that when teachers or a combination of people are interested in the concept of networks, that they don't just jump into a network without prior discussion of what are the characteristics of an effective network, what should be included, not committing to those, within the first couple of weeks, but taking the proper preparation time to say, what do we want this network to accomplish? What are its goals? So sharpen the goals, compare it to others, massage it a bit, get it right, be willing to change it and nuance. My book, we have unity of purpose, and then we have adaptation as the second one. Adaptation is you change it when you put it into practice. So each one has to fit the context. I want to say it that way. We have good guidelines for that, but the particulars have to be good for your context.
Good. Thank you. Thank you so much. And you might have touched on some of these questions in your talk as well, because some of these questions came in early in your keynotes. So excuse me if I don't pick out questions that you have not touched upon. Some of this might be a little bit repetitive, but I think also bringing out clarity. And a question that I know is in the forefront of the brain for a lot of teachers in Norway, also based on the responses for the first question, is if we start using new pedagogy in high school, will the students be able to adapt to this and still perform to the testing and exams that are still in our old system?
Okay, let me cheat a bit and back up. If you don't start new pedagogies in high school and students have new pedagogy experience in primary school, when they get to high school, you have more trouble than anything, because they're used to a different way of learning and you won't be good at that different way. So there's a danger in the back end, not just the forward end of this. But that's one thing. And then the second is, and this is the heart of what we have a team meeting later today at 5:00 Toronto time, all of our team just consolidating what we know where we're heading. And one of the big issues is assessing learning outcomes around the 6 C's. We're tied in with a group in Melbourne, Australia that's working on the same problem that they call new metrics for it. So here's the answer. In the short run, when you examine this part, that the new pedagogies actually do produce advancement on the old measures. So just think of the video I showed. Those students do better on literacy or math as a result of that, because there's some reinforcement of that, plus they're playing it out through the action. So I think in one sense, the new pedagogies label is a bit misleading, because there are good old pedagogies that we have in our book, a fusion of past and future ready ones, so that it's really not literally meant, if it's not brand new, don't use it. So, but it is pedagogy, so it's participative pedagogy. And I think that the first response is to make sure that when you use our model or your model, that you're actually still doing well enough, in fact, better on the regular tests that are barred there. There's not a liability. It's actually neutral or a small advantage, even in the old test. That's the short-term goal. The midterm goal is to change the old test so that they're better and more suited. But we don't have to wait for that change. In fact, it's better if we put pressure on that change by doing this other part. We have another observation here I'd like to throw in. I think I might have only a dozen of these sticky phrases, but another one is, if you're at the local level, municipality or school, is that you may be stuck with the state policy, but you're not stuck with the mindset. You can have your own mindset and still be within state policy. So we want proactivity to come from the bottom upward. the bottom into the middle upward. And I think the best central policymakers, and I have some confidence in Norway, don't resent the bottom up innovation. In fact, they like it to a certain extent.
Good. That's very very positive answer, and I really believe that learners that experience equity and mastery and well-being throughout their years in school will do better on tests, because you do learn more.
Exactly.
In that mindset. On the topic of teacher networks, how do I tell other teachers about how change is in my pedagogy is good for students / deep learning without telling them that what they have been doing for the last decade possibly isn't great? The teacher who still has an instrumental approach to students / learning in question.
These are all good, great questions. I'm just sort of making a note to myself on this. Let me start by saying our attitude toward what teachers are doing mostly is neutral. That is, a traditional teacher could be doing fantastic things with their students. So I don't have an a priori attitude. There's a bunch of traditional teachers that are not doing well, and therefore we have to do something about it. So when you think about how change occurs, and this is the change process I'm talking about, this is use the group, change the group, is when you have the following 3 or 4 conditions, teachers will change their pedagogy. And these are the conditions. One is that there's a degree of specificity, or what I call precision, to what is being proposed. If you just give a general thing like have learners participate more, there's no guideline there. You just don't know where to do. But if it's fairly specific, as ours are, precise. So that's one. These things go together. So specificity, precision, one. Number 2 is you develop a spirit of transparency. People are used to seeing other teachers. You visit other schools. There's a norm and agreement that we will learn from each other. So transparency is the second one. Third, absolutely crucial, is what we call non-judgmentalism. You agree that you won't you will interact to learn, but you won't have an approach to get in there and judge people as soon as you see it. Oh, how could they possibly do that? And when we did this the first time, and successfully in the 2005 in Ontario, we trained ourselves and the politicians to be non-judgmental, because we said if you're judgmental, it will undercut openness, and we won't be able to access it. And yes, some people, when you see terrible teaching, you got to roll your eyes and you want to do something like that. The trouble with that is rolling your eyes is not a very good strategy for convincing people to change. It backfires. So I think, and this has to do this, when I take transparency, specificity, and non-judgmentalism, it really has to do with trust. How do you create conditions of trust? So, and I think we do talk this openly about it. It's not just a secret in the mind of the leader. It's a group of teachers. We're talking about, like, what is it like to watch each other's teaching? How do you feel? What do you do? All of that. You get an atmosphere of cooperation that is developed that people will generally value. And you also value individuals' rights. Remember connected autonomy. Autonomy is okay. Even though I might not agree with the way you're teaching, we're not a profession that forces people to change. Now, if somebody is abusing children or there's something extreme, that action is always there, but not on the day-to-day learning. You just want to make it possible to learn. And we know also that this feeds on each other. That is to say, when a school is well led and teachers are working together, other teachers want to come to that school. The school has a reputation for working cooperatively, and it becomes a good place to work, because PISA is showing this again, and their TELUS surveys that when there's collaboration, teachers are more satisfied with their work. People want to work there. They stay there longer. All of those things. If there's individualism, people say, I don't want to go to that school. It's not friendly enough. I'm a teacher and I want to work with other teachers. So the whole thing feeds itself forward in a positive way. And I have to say that the two, if we want to talk about change, the two biggest changes we're talking about, although maybe we could take each role, is one is the role of the student as a participant, a partner. We have that in that. But the other role is the role of teachers in partnership with students, but also in partnership with parents and teachers, other teachers. And furthermore, in the pandemic, the importance of parents has become more prominent. And therefore, that's another partnership that has to be figured out. And if you figure it out well, you figure it out for the better.
Good, great, thanks. We are getting close to the end of the session. We are going to finish up in about 4 minutes. I'm going to challenge you to answer the next question very specifically, very clearly, just like you said, one of your factors that you lifted. And I think you've touched on this a lot in your presentation. You've also touched on it in a couple of the answers you've given already. But let's just have the 1 minute version of why you think deep learning is better. If that's the case, why is it better than following the syllabus with tests and exam, which students will benefit from in-depth learning, and how much more will they learn? Specific question, specific answer, please.
Okay. The specific answer is the academic pathway that you described as the second one. The evidence is overwhelming that students are not intrinsically interested at the beginning in that pathway. 80% are not interested. So the overwhelming evidence is you don't get anywhere with that. You can't force people to want that. Absolutely clear that academic obsession and that kind of curriculum is one that students do not have intrinsic interest in at the beginning. But if you go to the 6 C's, they immediately have intrinsic interest. And so you can then get to the academic part through the 6 C's doorway, possibly because it's all about intrinsic innovation for students in terms of what they want to learn and what they want to do. And we can shape that, but we can't shape it with an increased emphasis on academic standards and tests.
Thank you very much, Michael. I will now leave the honor of thanking you and saying goodbye to my boss, Yngve Lindvik, and your friend. So I would just like to thank you personally, Michael. It's been a real pleasure talking with you and listening to you today. Yngve, see us off.
Yes, thank you very much, Michael. Again, it's always a pleasure to be inspired by you. And I'm not sure where we will put this paper, but somewhere on the Enkel site, because it's free, so people can download it, and it's a good paper to read, and it sums up a lot of the things you have been into in this keynote. Recently, we have been thinking a lot about how to involve students, especially in the beginning of our project. How do we give them choice? How do we start, these wonderful sessions where you see students work for weeks? And we have started to use a concept called involvement competent student. So basically, how do we create involvement competent students, and especially in the beginning of projects? How is that done? That's a question from me to the last.
That's a good way of getting at it. Because I know you relate to Andy Hargraves, he and Dennis Shirley have a big book coming out on the 5 pathways of engagement. And involvement is engagement, good engagement. And what they are bringing to the table is specific versions of that. So I think there is, first, you can predict there'll be a great interest on the part of students on how I can, as a student, can be involvement competent. There'll be quite a bit of uptake. And therefore, when you get that uptake, you have to have specific ways of fueling it. And I think your Learn Lab, you will have ways of measuring it and feeding back and having rapid feedback and development. So I think that's actually a very good way. I like specific ways of getting into new pathways. And I think that way has an intrinsic appeal to it, and it will to lots of people. And you will open up a lot more ramifications that are positive than if you just said, well, students should have more involvement. That would just be too vague. So I like it. I think it's going to have a lot of specificity, and we'd be glad to react to your experience once you start developing that tool.
Yes, we will keep in touch. So I will just close by saying thank you very much, and give the floor back to Enkul.
Okay, I'm sure we'll see each other quite a lot in the next 12 months or more. So thanks, Yngve. This is great. I love what you're doing in Norway with and beyond that, actually, other countries in Scandinavia. Thank you.